is the second time my wife and I have been to India. The first time was 2.5 years ago for an event in Bhutan, organized by the Prime Minister to pursue or begin to flesh out the idea of education for gross national happiness. And I asked him why he would want Americans to come to Bhutan to talk about happiness. He said, we know about stuff. We don't know about happiness. If he wants to have a conference on a gross national product, we may be able to help, or used to be able to help. But it's really nice to be here. And Bangalore is a very special place. And I want to say several words before going much further. One is to thank Gladwin Joseph for getting us here, for the invitation to be here. And it turned out we thought we had a 10-year visa. We had only a 6-month visa, which had expired sometime before. And so we had to scramble around. We wouldn't have gotten it in part if Gladwin had not intervened. We were trading emails one day when it was midnight here in Bangalore, and he was responding right away to emails I was sending him at midnight. So the last email I sent him was, did you ever sleep? And he said no. He was working on the conference. And Kalabawa, thank you for your role in so many ways in starting ATRI and in conservation biology, and as a great scientist and in the United States and in India, and for your intervention to get us here also. Thank you very much for that. It's a pleasure to be here also to see ATRI, a magnificent organization. And we spent a bit of time there yesterday in a beautiful building and meeting some of the staff. And you notice I got my copy. I wasn't going to leave it up on the table. I want my copy. I want you guys to, you editors, to sign it afterwards. So ATRI is the kind of organization, it's a small organization with a staff of roughly 22 and a small budget, but with an outsized effect. Small budget, big effects. And so I salute all of you involved in ATRI, a magnificent organization, for the work that you do and do so well. I spent a bit of time with Wipro, and that was very interesting also. And I thank all of you who made this visit so pleasant. I want to start with just a background. You all know this. Where are we on? We're on a very small planet. If you took a soccer ball and wrapped it in cellophane, that's about the thickness, the relative thickness of the biosphere. There's not much of it. We are at a surge in population. If we had been here in 1800, world population would have been maybe, give or take, 1 billion people. And now there's 7 billion of us on the Earth. The United Nations says we'll be at 10 billion people by the end of this century. We're coming to the end of the era, not of fossil fuels, but the end of the era of cheap fossil fuels if they're priced at their full cost. And the theme of what I want to talk about is the implications of that next number on the slide, 395 parts per million. We've never been here before. And we're already committed to a warming of the planet that will be somewhere in the range of about 1.5 degrees to 1.8 degrees, and that's if we stop emitting carbon dioxide and other heat-trapping gases today. Your work in conservation biology is going to be particularly stressed by those facts. 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then 10 billion people all trying to live a good life means a lot more consumption. We'll have to be a lot smarter about what we consume and how we do it, and how we build and how we live. That's what I want to get to at the end. But 25 to 50% of our fellow passengers on Earth are said to be in jeopardy, and we are as well. There is no species of life, including our own, that doesn't face trials and tribulations in the years ahead. So that's the start, but you all know that. That's the world in which we live. So here's what I want to do in a few moments I have with you. I want to begin by saying a few words about conservation biology, this endeavor that all of you are doing such great work in and important kinds of things. I want to talk about climate change, and it isn't global warming. It's planetary destabilization. And I want to talk a bit about how we think about that and how we say that, and a bit of the psychology behind conservation biology and climate change. I want to talk about a bit about the causes, and then I want to flip the coin over. I want to talk about what do we do. And I'll say at the very beginning, I don't know what we do. I'll tell you what I am doing. And I'll tell you what I think that we ought to do in large. But anybody who would stand before you and say, here's exactly what we ought to do, would not be telling you the truth. And then I want to say a few things in conclusion. Conservation biology was born in a kind of a paradox. It was a science, but right at the very beginning, as Madhav Gadgil and Ramachandra Guha said, that ironically religion and custom, as ideologies of resource use, are perhaps better suited to deal with a situation of imperfect knowledge than supposedly scientific resource management. Now that goes down hard because we are creatures of a scientific world. All of us live in a world of science and technology, and no matter what your walk in life or your role in life, you've been imprinted with science. But then we admit that as science has gone up like this, conservation or species numbers and ecosystem health has dropped like that. And it is possible we could have a great field of conservation science and conservation biology, and you could have the whole membership could be 1 million people around the planet, and the planet would continue to deteriorate. That's the paradox. Don't know how to solve it, but it is to say that knowing is, in this case, how you preserve species and ecosystems and the landscapes on which they depend isn't necessarily totally a function of science the way we've done it in the past. That's the paradox. That is a paradox, and it was there at the present of the very beginning of the discipline. And then there is a second. At the very start, Michael Soule and the other founders of the field of conservation biology aimed to create what seemed to defy Western notions of science in this way. They said this would be a value-based science, and we had presumed in the past, and this goes back to Galileo and Bacon and Descartes and lots of other people who are part of the culture of Western, or the DNA of Western science. That this would be science should be value-free. Of course, that is a bit of a paradox in itself, because the value of being value-free is itself a value. But the idea that Soule and the other founders of this discipline proposed was that we wouldn't be like you are now, sitting idle as passive observers, watching a soccer game or a cricket game or whatever it might be down on the field. You would be scientists, but you would be in some fashion participants. And Dr. Bawa's call to take conservation biology and see it in the large, as a large, integrative, active discipline. I want to come back to that point later. The issue of climate change, and all of you know about this as much as I do, but let me go through some of this. So let me describe how we respond to this issue and how we must respond to it. This is a chart that appeared in an article in Nature magazine a few years ago. And the authors of the article were trying to portray the totality of environmental threats. And so what they did, the green circle was the safety, the realm of safety, and around the perimeter, you see a whole series of characteristics. Let me focus on only two. Climate change is this one right here. And so as long as you cross this green boundary, that's the point of safety, and we are well past the point of safety with at 395 parts per billion carbon dioxide. And then conservation biology, this one right here, we're well past it. But we know lots about species, or lots we don't know. But as they looked at the threats, they looked at them as kind of slices of a pie. And of course, you and I know that they're also integrated. These things feed on each other. And so as ecosystems deteriorate, for example, the ability to uptake carbon also deteriorates. So they're not separate things, but they were trying to portray the threats. What we've seen in the scientific literature on climate change, right through the article in June 7th issue of Nature by Baranowski et al. On tipping points, is that the pace of change in so many ways is going faster than was predicted even a few years ago. So all of you have seen this. This is the curve of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that was first developed by David Keeling. It's called the Keeling curve. And when David Keeling went to Mauna Loa to measure carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in 1958, the level was around 315 parts per million. If you extend this back to the pre-industrial period, it would have been about 280 or 290 parts per million. But you can take that curve and you can extend it back 640,000 years in the ice core record, and it doesn't go above 280 or 290 parts per million. And the scientific literature now suggests that if you weaken the standards of evidence just a little bit, and get into the paleo record, you could extend this curve maybe back 1 million or 2 million. Somebody several years ago said 14 million years. But anyway, we're a species that's about 100, 150,000 years old. And the level of carbon dioxide as we became a species in the Holocene was very, very narrow. And so 280 parts per million was roughly the level in which you and I became part of this human endeavor. That's the era in which we became everything that we have ever been. That's our poetry, our culture, our science, our literature, our wars, our highs, our lows. That's when humanity developed. Now, one of the problems we have is this. And I'm saying things that all of you know. I want to say this partly as a reflection on how we know this and how we react to what we know. So there's about a 30-year lag, we're told, between what comes out of our tailpipes and our smokestacks and the climate change-driven weather effects that we see. So as we see climate anomalies grow, hottest hots, wettest wets, driest dry conditions, windiest wind conditions, as we see those anomalies grow, what we're seeing is records being set by what humans did 30 years ago. And that makes it hard for us. I'm a political scientist by training, and we don't respond very well to these long-term issues. And so 30 years ago, that's a long time ago, and then we have to think 30 years ahead. We don't know what 395 parts per million will do to ecosystems, to human societies, and it's kind of a bet, isn't it? Because here you have, you're betting, or we're betting, on how a highly nonlinear system called nature works. And where, as Baranowski et al. In the article in Science, or pardon, Nature magazine in June 7th, trying to identify tipping points where it tips into a different state. And then there's another nonlinear system, it's called human society. It's economies, it's humans, it's the way we react in large numbers as organizations, as economies and societies and politics, political systems. And so you have two nonlinear systems in action. But there's a lag effect here. And so we don't know what 395 will do, let alone 400 and 450 parts per million. We're adding to this number a little over 2 parts per million per year. Now, I want to put this in as a national confession. On the right-hand side, the pie chart indicates that the USA, this blue section right here, has been responsible for about 27%, give or take, of the carbon presently in the atmosphere. I'll come back and explain why I think that's important. So this isn't an equal sort of thing. And what this goes back to Dr. Bogwood's point. Conservation biology can't avoid political issues. They will affect everything that you do. The receptivity of the societies and governments and corporations to your science will be affected by lots of other factors. These are some charts on surface temperature, and they all look more or less like this. Things are going up and things are warming. But notice that the rate of warming is actually, by most scientific reports, accelerating. And then if you look at it by decades, each decade has been hotter than the decade before. And so if you look at blocks of time, the same trend holds true. And this is true whether you're using surface temperature records or satellite temperature records. And then as we begin to think about the future, where is this going? This is from the International Energy Agency, UN agency, and not known for being very radical. And what they're saying is roughly the same thing that the Royal Academy of Sciences in London said a few years ago, that we're on a path that will run past a 2 degrees centigrade warming. Now, when we did the climate action plan for President Obama, we brought together the leading US scientists and climate policy experts, and each of them, including Rosina Beerbaum, who had been President Clinton's science advisor, and John Holdren, who is currently President Obama's science advisor, they all said the same thing. 2 degrees centigrade warming is the point we should not go past. And that is not to say that on this side of 2 degrees centigrade warming it's safe. We don't know. And as we know more and more about the science, it appears that safety is closer to maybe a degree to a degree and a half than it is to 2 degrees. But be that as it may, everybody said 2 degrees centigrade warming was pretty much the point of no return. Don't go past that level. That was also a level set by the United Nations. It's been endorsed by governments, by intergovernmental agencies and organizations, but we are now on a path that will sweep us past 2 degrees centigrade warming. And the U.S. administration, I think, to my disagreement, serious disagreement, is now more or less accepting that we will go past 2 degrees centigrade warming. I'll come back to that in just a moment. So this is what the future looks like, and you've all seen curves like this. The question then is whether civilization, global civilization, in this highly interactive, nonlinear system called nature, interacting with this highly nonlinear system called human societies and economies and so forth, whether those systems would survive, or whether civilization could survive in the turmoil between these two nonlinear systems. You follow what I'm saying? We don't know. And if there is, let's say, a 50-50 chance, maybe the odds of catastrophe are only 1 in 2, but you wouldn't get into a car, if you're rational, if you thought there was a 50% chance of a fatal accident while you were in the car. You wouldn't do it. But this is the whole planet, and the odds are probably close to unity, that at some point, we don't know where the point is, and this is the point of Baranowski's article in Nature. We don't know where the tipping point is where we lose control, but we know it's closer than we would like to think. This is a chart done by the late Stephen Schneider and some others. This is the TAR report in 2001, the third assessment report. This is a 2009 assessment. And the only thing important in the chart is the color. You don't need to read the words. But notice how the more we know, the more we learn in those simply 8 years between the 2001 third assessment report and 2009, we began to realize that these red lines, the danger zone, was much closer to this 2 degree guardrail than we thought. Now, if you updated this to 2012, the red zone would be coming down even further. The more we know, the worse it looks. So, in a risk sense, this is what we've done. We've shifted this Gaussian risk curve to the right. The implication is that we'll have lots more bad things happen here, unpredictable, kind of what the risk analyst Nassim Taleb describes as black swan events. But this will be more and more what we experience. This is a graphic taken from Science a few years ago, and typically we dismiss the tails of the Gaussian curve. And now it looks like what is being described as a long tail. The tail on the right-hand side of that Gaussian distribution curve, in fact, is the worst part of it. But the fact is we don't know what the risks are. We only know that they're there, probably rising, probably have global consequences, and in some respects are irreversible and irrevocable. So worst case scenarios are not low probability events, but may be inevitable under current momentum. That was a report from E3G last year. That's a European group. This is from Swiss Re, and this is the blue line. These are numbers of catastrophes. These are normalized, just a straight line. So this vector is, the blue line is hydrological events, the orange and below is climatological events, and both growing. Now Swiss Re is an insurance company. It's their job to pay attention to risk. And so if they pay attention to risk, they chart these numbers because they have to pay. But notice the bottom line here. This is geophysical events, and we've paid all too little attention to the effects of climate change on geophysical events. There's now a growing body of research about the effects of melting ice, particularly say the Greenland ice cap or glacier fields and so forth. And as they melt, the weight on geologic layers begins to lighten, and you get a rebound effect, and you begin to trigger seismic events. We don't yet know a great deal about it, but there's serious research coming from Oxford and other places on that. Countries have set new temperature records in 2010, including 128 degrees in Pakistan, and that would be, some of those will be broken this year. This is the Russian heat wave several years ago. This is where it appears as several standard deviations out to the right of that normal curve. This is old data showing what summers in 2040 and 2060 would be like, and then the bottom shows summers in 2080 and 2100, warmer than the warmest on record. But we understand this. Things are going to get hotter, probably faster and less predictable than we would like. This is recent data in the United States. These are the ratio of record highs to record lows. And so in 1950, it was about 50-50. In 2012, the record highs exceed record lows by 7 times. And if you factor in the last several months in the United States with heat waves in the Midwest, the number has gone up over 10 to 1. This is the U.S. Drought Monitor right at the end of July. This is an article that's about to come out in Nature Geoscience, which says that by the middle of or by the end of this century, the U.S. Midwest, and I think by implication it's plausible that other large mid-continent areas will also become net sources of carbon, not carbon sinks. We're watching the biosphere shift dramatically. And this is simply drying and conditions, and you can see this, and there's a lot of unpredictability. We've been here during one of the worst droughts. India is still, the subcontinent is still in the green here. Raise the temperature a little bit, and lots of other things happen. The theory that we've worked under is you can raise the thermostat of the Earth and nothing else wobbles over here. That's not this nonlinear system. It's highly interactive, and it's highly reactive. So if you look at corn, the U.S. corn crop, and corn is the red line here. Corn has turned out to be very sensitive to warming. It doesn't pollinate. A few degrees centigrade change has impacted the corn crop in the United States dramatically. And that will be true of other crops. It's apparently less true of Asian rice, but at some point temperature will impact crops, and we'll see temperature affecting politics because of food supply. And then this is record rain in Mumbai, July 26, 2005, just there. Yasi, the largest cyclonic event that hit in Australia in 2011. Thailand, flooding last year. This is observed ice, and you can barely make out, but there's a dotted line right in here that shows current ice. This is the ice trend in the Arctic. This was taken several days ago, July 8 and July 12. This is melting. This is the first time we've seen virtually the entire surface of Greenland melting. And so the planet's air conditioning system is breaking down. And the temperature in Greenland is being charted, and it's gone off the chart. The same thing, more or less, is happening at the other pole. This is the Antarctic, and warm seawater in the western ice shelves, the western part of Australia, or part of Antarctica are in jeopardy. These are projections on sea level rise and so forth, and you all understand this, that as ice melts and the thermal expansion of water, sea level will rise. And once again, we were caught unawares. The fourth IPCC report showed that a few centimeters of warming, but when that report appeared in 2007, it was already, by its own author's admission, obsolete. Bangladesh, obviously very vulnerable, as are low-lying areas in the United States, New Orleans, and so forth. Then I want to get to a last couple of points about climate change. We, in my country, like to have solvable problems. We think we are problem solvers. But this isn't a problem that is solvable in the same way that, say, a broken down car, a mechanical device, is fixable. David Archer, a geophysicist at the University of Chicago. The climatic impacts of releasing fossil fuel CO2 to the atmosphere will last longer than Stonehenge, longer than time capsules, longer than nuclear waste, far longer than the age of human civilization so far. Each ton of coal that we burn leaves CO2 gas in the atmosphere. The CO2 coming from a quarter of that ton will still be affecting the climate 1,000 years from now. This isn't fixable in the way we think most problems are fixable by any known technology that is cost effective and itself carbon neutral. We bumped into a limit, and now we have to figure out how to get back and rethink the problem. The reason is that carbon is pulled out of the atmosphere at very different time scales. So there are decadal time scales, there are centuries, there are millennia. And so it takes a long time for the Earth to reabsorb the carbon that we put into the atmosphere. And then there are these tipping points. These are the 12 that have caught people's attention. And the scary one, they're all important, but the scary one I think that ought to capture a good bit of our attention is related to methane. And as the Earth warms and permafrost melts, the CH4, the methane that is locked away in boreal forests, is released to the atmosphere. The same is true with methane in clathrate formations in the seabed. So a slight warming of sea temperatures can cause a large release of methane. This is the best conjectural evidence, I think, about the Permian extinction. I vaguely remember, I was just a child when this happened. That's a joke. See if you're awake. What appeared to happen was what are called the Siberian tracts, or volcanoes, released a lot of CO2 over a long period of time, 10,000 years or so. And as they did, they warmed the Earth several degrees. That warming was sufficient to break down clathrates, which then released CH4, which then raised the temperature of the Earth another 4 to 7 degrees. And that was enough to cause the largest extinction event that we're aware of. So this is a little bit like, as James Hansen, the scientist, said, taking dice if you're a gambler, and taking the face of the dice and making catastrophe more than just one face. Now it's 2 or 3 or 4 different faces. Now, to summarize, there's a scientific consensus, much better accepted here than in my country, the United States. Virtually 100%. Climate change is unfolding faster and larger than anticipated. The scale and duration is global, virtually permanent as we measure time. Tipping points are, well, no one knows where they are, but there are nasty surprises in the works. And then risks are foolish. I want to come back to this. I want to turn the coin over and say, what do we do about this at this point? We know enough to do much better than we're doing. Now, in the States, and this doesn't apply nearly as much in India and in Asia as it does in the United States, but look at your own feelings about this. What I've done is to put a lot of pixels on a screen. And there's nobody in this auditorium that's got sweaty palms or increased heart rate because of those pixels on the screen. Now, if I was to pull the curtain aside here and have a Bengal tiger stroll out on the platform, we would get your attention, assuming it didn't look at me, just walking toward you, because all of a sudden your fight-flight mechanism would kick in. You follow what I'm saying? We're not wired to think about 280 to 395 parts per million. That's not how we evolved. We evolved responding to threats. If there was an enemy coming through the woods at us, we were good at that. That was a war, and we could slaughter each other with alacrity, and we got very good at it. We're good killers. And so if an enemy was dependably loathsome or long-toothed and nasty, we got good. We evolved that way. That was our evolution. Do you follow what I'm saying? So now we have the difficulty of taking a problem and dealing with it that is purely science and trying to understand what that means for human behavior. But it is awfully hard because you'll feel the tiger. You'll feel the rush of adrenaline. Nobody felt adrenaline as I was walking through the science here. That's one point. Now, the second point in the States, people say, oh, that is so gloomy, and that is gloom and doom. And my response back is, don't give me that. Don't tell me that. And this is more typical of debates in my country than yours. But if somebody goes to a doctor and the doctor says, you've got a potentially fatal illness, you've got cancer or something, you don't tell the doctor, doctor, that's an awfully gloomy prediction. What you'll ask the doctor is, you may want a second opinion, but how do I save my life? You follow what I'm saying? But if it's merely the planet and it's for all time, we blow it off. Now, here's a case where we, in the biology and in the conservation and the ecology movement, all these related movements, we've got to have the courage to say the truth. And the truth is, we're in trouble. That's simply the truth. And if people are depressed by depressing news, that's good. You should be depressed by depressing news. You shouldn't be paralyzed by it. But you should be depressed if the news, in fact, is depressing. You follow what I'm saying? So, if in the States there is a bit of a battle going on, and I'm kind of in the middle of part of it, what do you tell the public? And we've asked President Obama in 2009, and again, we'll be asking him next year, if he's reelected. And that's still in the balance. But assuming he's reelected, to go to the American public. We're the big problem. We're the cork in the bottle, so to speak, on climate policy globally. Go to the American public and speak the truth. And not just, don't end it with just the truth. Things are awful and y'all have a good day. But say the truth as a scientist would say this. And then offer a climate action response plan. So it's important that our voices get added to this worldwide, that we be part of the people who can tell the truth in the belief that folks can handle it. Do you all see Western movies? The movie with Jack Nicholson, A Few Good Men. Do you remember that one? How many of you have seen that? A Few Good Men? Oh, good grief, most of you have. All right. Do you remember the scene where Tom Cruise, who's a young attorney, works for the Army, has got Jack Nicholson on the stand? It's a court scene. And he says to Nicholson, all I want from you is the truth. And Nicholson never spits out those words, you can't handle the truth. Remember that? Now there's a view that we can't handle the truth, that we're weak. And there's a view, the British poet T.S. Eliot said the same thing, humankind can't bear much reality. I don't believe that. I think most of us want the truth, and you in the scientific world have got to be truth tellers. And the truth is, every species you study, every landscape you study, every ecosystem you study, and their unity in this larger thing we call the biosphere, all of those, in the language of another movie, are dead ecosystems walking. They live under a contingent death sentence until we remove that sentence. That's our job. And that's why I want to, once again, underscore the idea that conservation biology has got to be a big and active science. It was born as a radical science to join scientific method with a set of values that said that life is important and the role of science is to do all we can to preserve life. And that means we have to get out of, you will have to get out of the kind of the comfort zone of publishing in a small number of journals and doing your scientific work and then forgetting what happens in the outside world, because that world is under a contingent death sentence until we remove it. Let me go on. So what do? What do I propose? And this is where things get very inadequate. I don't know what to do. I'll tell you what I'm doing, but I don't know what the rest of you should do. But if you begin with things that we know how to do, and especially in a city like Bangalore that's so technologically advanced, we have technology now, the first and foremost, that can help us a great deal. So if the Earth were a patient involved in a bad accident and taken to the emergency room of a hospital, the first thing you'd do would be stabilize its vital signs. You'd stop the hemorrhaging and the bleeding. And you try to avoid and minimize the initial trauma. So that's the thing that we've got to do. One of my favorite cartoons on this point is this one. Can you all read that? This was taken out of one of the very famous science cartoons years and years ago. And then a miracle occurs. So I want to talk about what's a miracle look like in this case. I believe it would be something like this. Any questions on this slide? You're looking at one of the famous slides in energy policy worldwide. And let me just explain this, because it doesn't matter, the wording doesn't matter. Don't you just love PowerPoint? People like me can put little tiny words on screens, and then we can kind of laugh and say, we can see you squinting out there. I can't see that. It's like a big eye exam. Anyway, what this slide is this. This line is zero cost. And then you go up, this is the cost curve, this is below cost, so this is like a bank endowment. Then each of these slices are different technologies. And so what you're seeing is that these basically all pay for themselves. So if I take a, let's say, I don't know, 100-watt incandescent light bulb, and I replace that with a 4-watt LED light, I get the same amount of light, matter of fact, better light, but instead of 100 watts, I got 4 watts. And so those things pay for themselves very quickly. So technologies like that are down here. Now this is where human ingenuity, that's so abundant in Bangalore and Silicon Valley and places like this, we've learned how to basically eliminate half or more of our energy consumption. Now look at the other side of the line here. If I go above the line, this is zero, so now I'm up here to a couple of cents a kilowatt hour. This is still a pretty good bet, but the cost is something. But notice the point, and this came from McKinsey Global, which is a big think tank for the consulting company for major corporations around the world. The point of the chart is that this area equals that area. And if I boil that down to numbers, it says we can eliminate 40% of our energy consumption at no net cost. We have options. We're not fated to fry the earth. We're doing it because of stupidity or policy or whatever. Do you follow what I'm saying? We can eliminate. And if you weaken some of the assumptions here, and let's move this up to 50 or 60%, if we have a sense of real global urgency about this, could you eliminate half or 60 or maybe 70% of the energy consumption by doing nothing more than eliminating all the energy consumption we do not need? The answer is yes. We know how to do that. This is not pie in the sky. This is stuff that is off-the-shelf technology, as they say. Then you think about the total energy budget. Our energy consumption is dwarfed every day by the amount of solar energy that intercepts the Earth's atmosphere. A few thousandths of that number. And so is there enough solar or radiation? It's diffuse, so we have to concentrate it in some way. But is there enough sunlight to provide the energy budget that eliminates carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Again, the answer is yes. And it's beginning to happen. Photovoltaic movement, photovoltaic deployment has been going at around 35 to 40%, partly because you'll notice the cost is getting cheap. There's now no good reason to burn fossil fuels for electricity. Or let me put it this way, there is less and less reason. And if I factor into the cost of a kilowatt hour of electricity burned in the United States or in India, it doesn't matter, the atmosphere doesn't care where carbon comes from. If I factor in the full cost of climate change, then this is already cost effective worldwide. And there are whole new industries waiting and that were beginning to be developed now very rapidly in photovoltaics. This is Grameen Shakti, a number that came out. The cumulative number of solar deployments is in red here. The rate of solar deployments per year is in blue. Very rapid. The same thing is happening across the United States and Europe and China and elsewhere. Wind power, much of the same thing. Now, the point of these slides is simply to say this. We have options. All that stuff about climate change is utterly, totally unnecessary. We do not have to suffer the heat death of the earth. Technologically, in this global emergency room, we can stop the hemorrhage of the carbon from the geology of the earth to the atmosphere. And then, what else do we do? Years ago, one of the most famous books ever written about Western economics was by Karl Polanyi. And he was a great economist, a great writer. And in his book, The Great Transformation, which is a classic of Western economics literature, he says to allow the market mechanism to be sole director of the fate of human beings and their natural environment would result in the demolition of society. What else are we seeing? We're seeing something like a virus that began in England, in the mills in central England, fueled by money raised by cutting down Indian forests, exploiting Indian labor and Indian resources. And then the virus spread to the United States and it spread around the world, and now markets have taken to be the only way to organize economies. Now, I'm not an economist, but Polanyi's point was that we would destroy society if you let markets decide all of these things. You'd eventually destroy society. Markets are where you and I say I. The pronoun is me, mine, I. Governments and in some degree corporations are where you and I say we, where we come together in a collaborative kind of way. And that was Polanyi's point, that sooner or later I would predominate over we. We'd be unable to solve public, collective problems publicly and collectively. And one of the bets of the market economy we heard with what was called the Washington Consensus of the past 20 years was that we would eliminate poverty. And all the goals would be we would eliminate poor people and so forth and so on. And you and all of your work, if you're out in the field, you know that poverty and resource use are linked at the hip. There's no way to separate them. And so the bet was that if you just unleash the power of the market, we'll eliminate poverty. That hasn't happened. And in the United States alone, supposedly the wealthiest country still on earth, 400 people control more wealth than the bottom 150 million. We haven't eliminated poverty. It is spreading, and it's spreading worldwide. And the fact was, we were never as rich as we thought we were, because what we were doing was kind of this. We were taking resources, and forget carbon for a minute, forget the whole climate change thing. We were taking resources effectively and offloading the costs, like a boat going through the water, pushing a bow wave of water in front of it. We were offloading costs on other people, and they happen to be people in the third world. And some of the costs are getting offloaded, especially in the case of climate change, to future generations. We weren't as rich as we thought we were. We were simply exploiting, and we were good at it. And so, according to this is an article that appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences 3 years ago, the environmental costs of economic development globally that were externalized, were not paid by the consumers and by the people who benefited, $91 trillion. Are you with me? And by their number, 87% of that number was borne by people in the third world and not by the people who benefit. Do you follow? Markets didn't do what they said they were going to do. Now, you're a conservation biologist, and you can say, why do I need to do that? Oh, yes, you do. The decimation of species and ecosystems and climate change are linked at the hip to causes that had to do with the way we organize the economy. There were other ways to organize economies. But let's look at the economy just for a second. Again, I'm not an economist, but think about the laws of economics. What we take to be the laws of economics that began with a Scotsman, Adam Smith, writing a book called The Wealth of Nations. And Smith, actually, it's a very good book. It doesn't say a lot of what it is purported to say. But what Smith did was to set the laws of economics down in some kind of form that then allowed the discipline of economics to grow from that. But the problem that Smith didn't recognize was that the laws of economics that he described were only, at the time he wrote, they had no lifespan at all, but now they're roughly 234 or 235 years old. But they don't mix very well, they don't calibrate, as the engineering term, very well, the way the laws of ecosystems work that you study. And so the problem has been, you've got a system here where laws are a couple hundred years old, but the laws of ecosystems evolved over 3.8 billion years. And we haven't figured out how to get an economy that doesn't destroy the biosphere. And of course, in the end, the economy destroys itself. Second mistake. We believe that somehow infinite growth could occur on a finite planet. Now, growth is a complicated subject. Some places still need to grow. Some places need to go through degrowth, or what's being called degrowth. United States, too much stuff, we all have it. And then there's a third mistake. We didn't apply any value to the ecosystems that you study. So if you like to think about ecosystem services, or simply the fact that a butterfly or whatever species you find captivating has value of itself, it doesn't matter. We said it had no value in the market. And the value was only determined by the market. If people wanted to get aphrodisiacs from rhinos, okay, fine, there was a market for it, otherwise there wasn't a market for it. But nature services were not priced, and so they were left out of the whole economic equation. And then there was a belief that somehow if you run out of stuff, technology will substitute for it. And that works sometimes, in some ways, but it doesn't work if you're talking about fish or forests. If you decimate those populations, they're gone. And once they're gone, once they pass that line into extinction, they're gone forever. And then, of course, there's this problem. We thought that somehow we could create an economy that would build happiness as a function of the amount of stuff that we had. And so we were advertised. And so you were looking at Indian television, it reminds me a lot of US television, but we are the subject of the largest experiment ever run on Earth to deflect the human mind into consumption. This never happened before. And that began with advertising firms and Edward Bernays. That, too, is a subject that conservation biologists need to think about. So the rule is simply this, that we pay for sustainability, whether we get it or not. Or somebody else pays, someplace else at some later time. There is no free ride here. So as you think about the species and landscapes and ecosystems that you aim to preserve and protect and expand, think about how they fit into an economic framework. You've got to think about economics. What kind of economic system would in fact preserve species and landscapes? Nassim Taleb is a risk analyst. And his book, Black Swan, I talked about it at a talk the other day. I won't repeat that, but the point is that he was raising after the global financial collapse of 2008 was that all swans are white until one's black. And that's that unpredictable event. And black swan events, as he described it, have long-term effects. They're global, and they're largely unpredictable or with unknown predictability. And what he said here, I like this point. We've got to build a society robust to error, and also robust to human ignorance and mistake and mischief. And so if you want to conserve species, you have to begin to think at some point in your life about the architecture of the society that is capable of doing that, a society that is robust to error, and hopefully a society that has a sense of caring and compassion for our other sojourners on this planet, the species and life forms that are with us now. How do you do this? I don't know. This is my little town in Oberlin, Ohio. And I'll show you a map in just a minute, but I made a mistake last year of saying that I got this picture by strapping a first-year student at Oberlin College to a helium-filled balloon and equipped with a camera with electronic download. And I said, you know, we miss him a lot. He didn't transfer out of Oberlin. He just kind of blew away on the wind. And a woman afterwards came up and she thought I was serious. And I said, well, we really miss Bob. He was a wonderful kid. We miss him a lot. And she thought I was serious. I wasn't. This actually was taken from a balloon with a camera. But this is my little town of Oberlin. It's a city founded in 1832. It was the first college to accept African Americans and first college in the United States to accept women. We have a poverty level of 28%, so we're not rich by our American standards. This is where we are. Detroit is up here, Toledo is here, Cleveland is over here, so we are, and I'm supposed to start drinking right now. And this is, what, gin or water? This is gin. So we're Rust Belt. This is the part of the upper Midwest where we disinvested a good bit. What do we do? Well, we began by 10 years ago, so starting with the creation of the Adam Joseph Lewis Center. This building became a model for the way we think about curriculum. So can I take a small thing, a building of 13,700 square feet, and can I make a model of the kind of world I think can be sustained and can be sustainable? And so we got students all involved in this. This became a big classroom activity. We had 250 students work on the design. We had a design team that included people from NASA and architectural firms and engineering firms. This was the first, I think it's still the only, entirely solar-powered building on a U.S. college campus. And we made it, the students wanted to make it so it purified all its wastewater. So on the right-hand side over there, the little inset, that's what is called a living machine. It's basically an indoor wetland. And so when you flush a toilet, the wastewater goes in there, and plants do what plants do. They take out phosphorus and nitrogen. And if you get the design right, they can actually detoxify toxics. They can also retain some kinds of heavy metals up to a certain level. And so this became a part of our curriculum. We grow food on site. The landscape is maintained by the students. A high-performance building monitoring system was developed by students. That's now a private company in California called Lucid Designs. Now I want to take that model and see if we can take that model to the whole city. And we're a city of about 10,000 people. We're not big. And the first goal we have is to go, let me go back up here, is to rebuild the downtown. Can you make a downtown that functions like that building? Can you power it by sunshine? Can you eliminate waste? Can you take drinking water in and have drinking water come out? So can we make a model? Now this is how we think. We have to, your movement, my movement, all of us together, have to create models that people can see and touch and feel and experience. Because we don't much deal with abstractions. How do we make sustainability not an abstraction? So think about that tiger walking out here. That tiger all of a sudden is not an abstraction. That's a point that hits you in the stomach, your adrenal system kicks in, you're going to run out that door, or you're going to hide behind someone else. But how do we take sustainability, this big, confusing, abstract word, and make it real? So the goal was to make it real in the building. Now our next step is how do you make it real in the city? So we're going to make a downtown. We've already started work on this. Powered by sunlight. A vibrant downtown that all you young people would find attractive. There are shops and restaurants and music and activity. How do you begin to make sustainability a party? There's a challenge for you. Our second goal is to arrive at climate neutrality. So we're one of 14 sites selected by Bill Clinton's climate initiative around the world. We're the small city. The rest of the cities are 5 or 6 here in Asia. We're the little guy in the block. We're 10,000. Some of the other cities are 20 million. So we're the small one on the block. The goal is to get to carbon neutrality. We're not fated to heat the planet to death. Third goal is to redevelop local agriculture, grow 70% of our food locally. The fourth goal, as we did with the Lewis Center, is to make this educational. So our goal is to have 1,000 students work over the next few years with a design team that's redesigning the city to be sustainable. And then the fifth goal is to figure out how to replicate this so that we do this all over the United States and then all over Asia. We develop a large movement of cities, and people, and corporations, and institutions, all with the same idea of beginning to build models of sustainability and sustainable economies that work. And begin to do this from the bottom up, because the top has failed us. So we've organized the community this way. We have actually 11 teams. I can only get 7 balls on that particular slide. I never figured out how to do PowerPoint. So we have actually 11 teams. One of them is collecting data about how we're progressing, tracking carbon emissions and nitrogen flows in the community and so forth, and doing kind of a hard physical data gathering. Other teams are working on education and policy and law and all of these other things. So the Oakland project to date, I'll skip over this and maybe talk about it in Q&A, but we've made a lot of progress. We've been at this for 3 years. We've renovated a good bit of the downtown. We've got a lot more to go. This will take us at least 10 years, but we believe next year our electric system will be 96% carbon free. We'll have eliminated 96% of the carbon. We believe we can get the whole community to carbon neutrality by 2025. And the closer we got to begin to engage this, the easier it was, we think, to do it. These are the kind of things that we're aiming to do coming up. The next big project for me, is the linchpin for a lot of this is a hotel. We're trying to raise the last $1 million or so for a new hotel that is zero discharge, powered by sunshine, and is the attractor for people coming into the town and part of the thing that drives the local economy. Now, let me close with a couple of thoughts. The great work of your generation and mine, and a few of those to follow, but time's not our friend. We don't have time to dawdle. We'll have to do heroic things, and this is a room full of heroes and heroines. The first thing that we've got to do is stabilize heat-trapping gases. If the Earth was a patient at the emergency room, the first thing you do is stabilize vital signs. This is critical. It's critical to saving species, saving ecosystems, and saving landscapes. Everything you study, everything you care about, is under a contingent death sentence, unless we remove the sentence. Second, turn that coin over. I've said that we know how to do this. This is no longer a matter of technology. It's a matter of leadership. It's a matter of politics. You will have to become engaged in the decisions of your communities, and your states, and your regions, and your countries that have to do with energy policy and development issues. These are political issues at heart. Third, we will have to, and this is going to be tough for my country, we've got to go from a world emitting on average, the average American emits about 22 tons of carbon dioxide carbon per person per year. We've got to cut that to 2 worldwide. Now, carbon, the atmosphere doesn't care where the carbon comes from. It'll just change. It's a big physical system. There's a kind of a remorseless working of big numbers here. So for the United States and for India and for China and for everyone else, we've got to engage in a large debate. A British guy years ago coined the phrase contraction and convergence, but we've got to begin to contract. Some parts of the world need to grow. We've got to solve poverty as we solve climate. But some parts need to grow, some parts need to degrowth a bit. But we've got to converge on that number. And military power doesn't help us a bit. There's no army big enough, there's no Star Wars shield robust enough to save us. There's a fourth thing. We've got to figure out a different model, a different way to be human on this earth. If I use the word paradigm, I mean worldview. We've got to see ourselves as part of this network of life, this incredibly fecund, fabulous thing we call the biosphere. And so without that, and without the kind of precaution that would protect it, and parts of that philosophy are here, and they're alive, and they're well. The roots go back, they're ancient in your tradition in Hindu society. They're ancient in virtually every major religion on the planet. This isn't something we have to invent. It's something we have to rediscover. And then we need a new model of economics. We need to figure out how to be prosperous without having to continually grow and increase the human estate on the planet. We need to rethink politics, and politics is where you and I and all of us on earth say we. Politics is the place where we overcome the things that happen in the market. We need a way to solve public problems or global problems globally and coming together. So how about a global alliance? It's the top ball here. Again, only 7, that's all I can get on the screen. How about conservation biology and restoration ecology and all the kindred sciences? All have said we want to apply science to a set of values. How about leading the way and getting in people involved in sustainable agriculture and forestry management? And ecological designers, a field I'm involved in some, but begin to understand how we create shelter and food and livelihood and all these things that we do in a way that calibrates with the way natural systems work over here. And in informing what we want here by the way systems work over here. So there's a feedback loop. Progressive corporations, Wipro, Google, Interface, Unisys. I mean, progressive corporations, a lot of them in the IT business. But beginning to pull together, there's a lot of money, there's vibrancy, there's human creativity, but how about having them as part of this? One of my heroes and one of my good friends in life was until he died last year, was Ray Anderson, who started a company called Interface. And Interface Carpet, Ray decided years ago that he wanted to build a company powered by sunshine that left no waste product. And so he invented the idea of products of service. Actually, the idea was from Germany and Europe. But think of companies eliminating waste and powering it by sunshine. And then communications and education and renewable energy. But think of a large alliance here, a global alliance, non-governmental alliance, where we come together. But think of conservation biology as being a key part of that. And let me close with this. Elaine and I were in Lombard Park on Sunday. And this is one of the most beautiful trees I've ever seen. This is fabulous. How many of you have seen it? How many of you climbed up on it? I didn't. I'm too old to climb trees, but this was fabulous. But the tree of life is still here. It's still there. It's still worth protecting. And this is the challenge before us, to take conservation biology in your work and mine and see it in this context of protecting life. Conservation biology is a big subject. It is a big discipline. It is not small. Make it big. Because now everything is at stake. Thank you all very much.